Hi, welcome to the Orca. Forget about the weather, forget about the Canucks. Real estate is what British Columbians love to talk about. How much, who's buying, who's building, who's listing, and most recently, who can actually afford to buy here in the Lower Mainland. Sales are down this year, leading some to wonder if Vancouver's real estate bubble has burst. Well, despite a downturn in prices, there seems to be no public confidence that housing is affordable. Ryan Berlin is the Senior Economist with Rennie, working with one of Canada's largest real estate marketing companies, and Ryan joins us here in the Orca studios. Hello there, welcome. First question, is this a correction, or has there been a burst of the bubble? Or is there a bubble?
So, if anything, it's a balloon that's deflating a little bit. And we don't know whether a market for anything is a bubble until it's in our rearview mirror and it's burst. But I do know that we're in 2018. I go all the way back to 2010, and I was marching around town giving presentations about the marketplace and why I thought the fundamentals were actually strong, despite the fact that prices were rising, and that there wasn't a bubble, even though the chatter was this is a bubble. So here we are in 2018, and there definitely has been. We can use the word correction. That implies something was incorrect prior, and maybe it was. There was definitely an imbalance between supply and demand, and there was that intangible element of sentiment and expectation on the part of buyers and sellers. So there's definitely been a pivot in 2018. As you said, sales are down, inventories are growing, and I'm an economist, so I talk a lot about supply and demand, wouldn't you know? The dynamic of those two actually have produced what we'd expect in this slower market, and that is slowing prices, declining prices in some segments. So, a lot of people, the conditions currently present challenges for a lot of folks. Some buyers, but homeowners, some developers. But I look at it as a normalization of conditions, and the past 3 years of conditions in our marketplace, leading up to the beginning of this year, just hugely favored sellers. They were hugely imbalanced, and so you had these herds of buyers that would go from open house to open house, ready to make an offer, and oftentimes they'd be in a multiple offer scenario, offering above ask, subject free. And they wouldn't get it, and it's really demoralizing. I think a lot of those folks have gone to the sidelines. Part of it is an expectation thing, a consumer confidence issue, but obviously, and I'm sure we'll get to it, there have been other sort of external interventions into the market that have created these conditions.
Let's back up to supply, Economics 101, supply and demand. It seems we have so many condo towers being built now, and dozens more on the books that aren't even as much as a hole in the ground that are going to be built in the future. And yet, we hear anecdotally that demand for these condos remains at an all-time high. So what's going on in that particular segment of the market?
Definitely. I mean, condos tend to be the most, on the ownership side, the most accessible point of ownership if you compare them to something that's oriented on the ground, like a townhome or a detached home. So there's more baked-in demand for those types of units in any set of conditions, whether the market is expanding or contracting. They're less expensive, and they also present opportunities for investors and frankly, opportunities for additional supply for renters as part of that. And I know I've heard this perspective that, oh gosh, we must be building enough because when I look around the city, I see cranes everywhere. So
it's true.
Sure, yeah, absolutely. But that says nothing of. Do you see all the people moving here too? They're on a net basis from all sources, so other parts of Canada, immigrants. We've got around 40,000 people a year on a net basis moving to Metro Vancouver. Never mind the gross flows, the people moving in and the people moving out. So those people need to be accommodated somewhere. And so, without getting into the nitty gritty of the types of units, how many bedrooms, price point, location, we need to build and have ready for occupancy between 22 and 25,000 units each year in Metro Vancouver. It's a lot.
It all comes down to affordability. Is Vancouver affordable? And what do you say to young couples, even also young professional couples who have two good incomes, who say they just can't afford to live here? What does that say about the conditions in which we live in the Lower Mainland?
So I think that I'll deal with the first part of that first. Is Vancouver affordable? So oftentimes in these discussions too, we conflate what's happening in the city of Vancouver with what's happening in the region. And,
Right.
and outsiders as well will loosely use the term Vancouver and often cite data or information that's or features that are specific to the city, which obviously has a different dynamic. It is really a municipal energy center within the region. It's the largest base of jobs, of people. And so the city of Vancouver, in my mind, is never going to be affordable in any kind of objective sense of the word. It's always going to be, it might always be the most expensive city in Canada. It doesn't mean that we don't try as a society, as government, to ensure that there is housing choice, suitable housing, a diversity of housing, enough new housing to accommodate people. But I think this concept that because you grew up on the west side or grew up in a detached home in the city of Vancouver, that somehow there's a right to raise your kids in the same type of environment. And I can definitely appreciate the fact that it's frustrating that people feel pushed out. But the city, the city and the region are international now, and so I think we're trying to grapple with, collectively with who we are and what we're about. And we're not this old logging or fishing town anymore, where prices are determined by local incomes solely, although that is one factor. And so I think we're seeing, people don't. I don't hear people complaining about not being able to buy a detached home in Manhattan. It's just not on the table.
Affordability, though, the government, in fact, all three levels of government seem to think that Vancouver should be affordable, and there's been many different interventions from government to try and affect the market. Have they worked?
I think you can use, carrot and stick tactics, and I think we've used a lot of sticks to this point. I think you don't tax your way out of an affordability or lack thereof situation. So we've had a lot of interventionist policies that have, at the provincial level, largely that have had the effect of suppressing demand. If you're suppressing demand, you're not addressing the long-term issues. So let's talk about the rental side of the market, because now in the news we're hearing a lot about potential new rent controls and vacancy controls. Those measures are aimed at alleviating the symptoms associated with housing scarcity, but it does nothing for the problem of housing scarcity. And fundamentally, what we have is an issue of a certain amount of demand that's not being met with the right kind of supply or the right amount of supply. And I know that refrain is heard over and over, and people might roll their eyes at it. The reality is we need to continue to add supply. We need to encourage it. I think what we're seeing from the government is that we talk about housing more and more as if it's a public good. If we're going to do that, then it almost obliges the government or governments of all levels to ensure, in some way, to encourage supply. And I think we shouldn't be looking to penalize buyers or existing owners, or make it exceptionally onerous for builders and developers to bring units to market. Instead, we should be encouraging them, particularly on the rental side.
So if you look to the future, what do you see when it comes to affordability to real estate in the Lower Mainland?
I think it's always going to be expensive, unless we pull a Detroit of the early 20th century, where we have depopulation or a real slowdown in migration, therefore in demand, which likely would be reflective of deteriorating economic conditions. So
exactly.
it's not
I was just
necessarily.
going to say, let's hope we don't have that
Let's
situation.
hope we don't. I agree, and I think the situation we are in terms of our fundamentals is that we have an unemployment rate that regionally that is near its all-time low. We are operating at full employment. And so we hear about all these businesses, all the office space that's being pre-leased, and the companies that are moving in, the Amazons of the world, and other tech companies, and they want to hire a workforce. Well, some of that is going to come from other businesses around the city and around the region, but we're going to have to bring workers in, and if we're going to bring workers in, we have to house them. And so, there'll be ups and downs in the cycle of the housing market here, but I think we're always going to be faced with an expensive housing market. It's going to be a challenge for a lot of people. And again, I'll repeat that I think we should continue to strive to encourage the development of a wide range of housing options, low income, family housing, rental, that kind of stuff. But there's nothing that we can do in the short term to immediately change the affordability picture. We have to make investments from a policy perspective that will have impacts over the long term, and that's probably the best we can do.
Ryan Berlin, thank you.
Thank you, Rick.